Welcome back to the 2025 APAICS Technology Summit. I'm Tanya Layden, Vice President of Development and External Affairs. Our final panel of the summit is Advancing Digital Equity in Our Communities. Disinformation campaigns targeting AA and NHPI communities have surged, often exploiting language barriers, digital divides, and immigration narratives. From false stories about Southeast Asian refugees to in-language misinformation on platforms like WeChat, WhatsApp, and KakaoTalk, these campaigns erode trust and drive harmful policy outcomes. This panel will explore the intersection of national security, digital equity, and community resilience, highlighting strategies to close access gaps, strengthen in-language digital literacy, and amplify trusted voices to combat mis and disinformation across our communities. It is my honor to introduce KPAC Whip Congressman Ami Bera, who represents California's 6th District. Congressman Bera serves on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He is also a member of the AI Caucus and continues to advocate for digital equity initiatives in his district. Let's welcome Congressman Bera to the APAICS Technology Summit.
Hi, I'm Congressman Ami Bera. Here's to a great APAICS Technology Summit. As part of my work in Congress, I've been on the Science and Technology Committee. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how we educate the next generation in the new technologies. Also been very active on the AI task force, particularly in the healthcare space. AI can actually make us better doctors, can provide more efficient and higher quality healthcare. But we want to make sure it addresses all groups, including the Asian American Pacific Islander community. So as technology rolls out, I think this is an important summit that's happening to make sure there's equity for all demographics in the United States.
Our moderator for this panel is Shreya Singh Hernandez. Shreya serves as a Senior Manager of Empowered Communities at Aspen Digital, where she leads efforts on convening tech experts, collaborating with civil society leaders and academics, and creating systems of accountability through innovative data programs in the field of tech equity, product inclusion, DEI, and AI fairness. Please welcome Shreya and our panelists to the summit.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Congressman Bera, for those opening remarks. My name is Shreya Singh Hernandez. I'm the Senior Manager for Empowered Communities at Aspen Digital. I'm thrilled to moderate today's discussion about something that sits at the intersection of 3 pillars: digital equity, national security, and community resilience. Disinformation and misinformation doesn't just distort facts, it erodes trust. And when language access, digital access, and education gaps intersect, our communities can become especially vulnerable. But we also have extraordinary local leaders, organizations, and public servants building resilience from in-language fact-checking to senior digital literacy programs to legislation that safeguards our communities online. Today we'll unpack the work that is going on, what is working and what's not, and what gives us hope for a more equitable digital future for AA and HPI communities. I'm joined today by Jenny Liu, Senior Manager of Disinformation and Misinformation Policy at AAJC, State Senator Dr. Aisha Wahab at the California State Government 10th District, and Anni Chung, President and CEO of Self-Help for the Elderly. I'm really excited about this conversation. So to kick us off, our first question is on real-world impact. What is the real-world impact of misinformation? Can you share an example of how dis and misinformation have shaped how people perceive an issue or impact AA and HPI communities directly?
I'm happy to kick us off with this one. And before I dive into my response, I just wanted to say thank you to APAICS for convening this panel, and I'm really looking forward to sharing remarks on this issue and hearing from my knowledgeable co-panelists on this as well. So when it comes to misinformation, I think I kind of want to step back and talk a little bit about how misinformation, when it comes to breaking news events, has a distinct impact on Asian American communities rather than focus on one specific issue, quote unquote. So I think especially in this, what many experts are calling post-content moderation age, there's a lot of misinformation that proliferates when something big happens in the news, and there's a lot of speculation and perhaps lack of credible information circulating, or if there's misreporting that is corrected, but then at that point it's already out there and people are already rushing in to fill information vacuums and just speculation out there with their own theories and half truths. So one thing I wanted to spotlight is particularly how content moderation we're seeing more and more is getting bad in English, but especially worse in non-English languages. So when it comes to something like community notes, which I think a lot of social media platforms have shifted to in recent months and years, they are driven by consensus, and a lot of non-English posts don't receive the kind of enough volume to even receive any community notes at all. So a recent study by our partners at the Digital Democracy Institute of Americas did a linguistic analysis of community notes on X and found that Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese, commonly spoken languages among the Asian American community, none of these cracked the top 10 of community notes. And just an example of how these quote unquote safeguards are continuing to fail our communities when it comes to issues and breaking news events that come. So as this happens, we see how as tech companies are continuing to sort of turn their backs on commitments to user safety, Asian American communities and other vulnerable communities are often hit the hardest.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that, example in itself highlighted the importance of a number of different actors to do their part and to take their responsibility in avoiding misinformation in our communities. Opening up the floor again for anybody else who has additions to this opening question about the real world impact of misinformation.
Definitely. So I'd love to jump in. I want to highlight two examples. I have a district that's predominantly Asian. And what I have been seeing, the two examples I'll provide is one during COVID. For example, many people were talking about COVID and very derogatory statements towards China in particular, not only from the President of the United States directly himself, but also that type of information was spread by many of his followers and other individuals that were largely just promoting hate speech, if you will. We saw a huge uptick in Asian hate crimes, right, across the nation, let alone in the Bay Area and in California. And that is a real life example of what is happening rather than talking about the safety measures needed to keep everybody safe. The fact that, the shots are absolutely needed to make sure that we protect our elderly and those with compromised immune systems and much more. We also saw in Alameda County in particular, when they set up the COVID testing site and the shots that were provided, we saw a very low amount of Asian Americans seeking the shot. And I was asked specifically, can you help? Why is that? And I said, you have to specifically reach out to the Asian American community. And that is extremely broad, right? I am an ethnic Afghan American, but I am not viewed as Asian by many people, right? Even though Afghanistan touches China, it's considered Central Asia and much more and part of the old Silk Road. So I say this because the communities are very much disenfranchised from their local communities, and I'm talking about just their cities, their health safety nets, and much more. So not only is the government and those healthcare providers disengaged from the actual Asian American community, but also the Asian community. When we're talking about the COVID shots, they had to sign up online, and poverty is a big issue, and it's a huge disparity amongst the Asian community. I often talk about how there are some Asian Americans that come with six-figure salaries, full citizenship, been here for several generations. And then there are Afghans that are Asian, that come, as refugees, as asylum seekers, as, individuals that do not speak the language, don't understand the culture, and much more. So there's a huge disparity in socioeconomic background. The other example is that there are also a lot of Asian American leaders, I will say even in my own district, that to push the community to vote one way or another, they utilize a lot of fear mongering, a lot of misinformation about public safety. For example, when a jewelry store is broken into, or somebody is robbed, or anything like that. In order to sway a community, they will make it as if, one proposition or one law or one city council member has an effect on what is happening day to day, or the reason why somebody was robbed or something like that. So I will say that, that the applications, when people are on these large WhatsApp groups and WeChats and you name it, we should also question who is posting what and what is their agenda. Because if we are not seeing it on reputable news sources, it's not necessarily accurate.
Thank you, Senator. I want to chime in that as well. During the COVID, we've seen so much misinformation, and we are concerned that our seniors did not get the COVID vaccine, right? So we have to kind of keep saying, and you got to have the vaccine, but there's so much misinformation, and they always go to sites that are for the monolingual seniors that our organization serve. Then they go to these sites and they don't check, whether they're trusted source. So Jenny is great in sharing maybe later some of the sites that you could double check, these facts. But for San Francisco Bay Area, where self-help is located, the impact on the seniors when they don't have the right information, or when they keep hearing the misinformation, I'll share with you two examples. So one is on immigration, because our group does a lot of naturalization work. We hold large-scale naturalization services for the community every other month. And we've seen since February, all the hype about immigration, who holds visa, whose visa's been yanked, revoked, they left the country, they couldn't go back, right? Some are true, some are not true. But that scare tactic, whoever is putting out this misinformation, really stops some of the Chinese green card holders to come forth and be naturalized. We thought that become citizen is the best protection, but still they are so worried that they, might have done something in the past, and then with their application, they're gonna get caught being sent back. So those actually are happening to our naturalization workshops. We've seen a dip in the application since February, but very quickly it little bit climbed back up. But we have to do a lot more education, sending out the messages, the correct messages, why they need to become citizens for protection and all of that. So one area is the whole area of immigration. And we could all understand why the ICE raids are scary, right? People held back the children from going to school. They stopped coming to the sites for various nutritious congregate meals or even social services. So that's really impacting what they could have gotten and what they are now not getting. So the other example, also recently, we're dealing a lot with the family rezoning. Senator would know, because every city have to have the housing element plan to build X number of units of market rate housing and affordable housing. But again, we're seeing a lot of misinformation. People purposely that want to represent their side, of the argument or the equation, would go out and talk about upzoning, rezoning as a bad thing or as a negative thing, not knowing. People reading it might jump to a conclusion and then not knowing that it's going to affect also the development of affordable housing, which is so much needed for the low income residents in the Bay Area. So we have to, again, go out and make extra efforts to do these community housing workshops to talk about why certain zoning is important in order to build a density of affordable housing, but also to not let them fall into the trap like, oh, they're going to build 20, 30 stories buildings in our neighborhood, not knowing that the zoning itself are more along the commercial corridor. So people just hear it, then pass it around, pass it along, and then not knowing that, by withholding support for the zoning part will also affect building of enough affordable housing. So those are the work that's constantly that community-based organizations like Jenny's and ours have to balance and go out and make sure that the correct information is out in the community.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, just in this opening, we've heard so much about the layers of the NHPI community and what makes it unique and the opportunities, but also the distinct challenges when combating misinformation in our community, whether that be, this question about identity. Dr. Aisha Wahab, Senator Aisha Wahab, alluded to the idea of this conglomerate of ANHPIs, and Jenny, brought in a lot of great sort of environmental information about who are the responsible actors. And Annie, I really appreciate you bringing in the specific lens of older adults and the specific challenges that communities are getting. I also really appreciate the breadth of issues that we covered. For example, from healthcare and COVID to hate crimes to housing and local engagement to immigration. It's an issue that really affects all ways of life. So I think that brings us nicely to our next set of questions, which is on access and digital equity. When we look at digital equity, education is a big piece. Access to the internet, to broadband access is a huge piece. Access to physical devices is another big piece. A lot of these narratives are spread where there are information gaps, as we've mentioned in our opening. How does access to in-language resources or reliable internet shape whether false information spreads or gets stopped?
Yeah, we've seen that lack of, as you've alluded to, Shreya, lack of reliable internet and the digital divide, frankly, play a huge role in how our community accesses, or in often cases, is not able to access certain kinds of information. So we always say that digital access and literacy are really foundational to media literacy. And I think that's why it's really important that the work of organizations like Self-Help for the Elderly and other community-based organizations are doing the really important in-community direct services to help get members of our community more online and better connected to different resources. So our organization actually last year conducted a survey that found that around 17% of AA and HPI individuals don't have access to reliable high-speed internet at home. And so this means that oftentimes these individuals are turning to their mobile phones to access the internet. And obviously, when it comes to a media literacy perspective or having access to information about a variety of sources and topics, this creates issues with people using their phones might be more likely to just skim headlines or quickly skim information. It's harder on your phone to open multiple tabs or to perhaps compare sources side by side and do the kind of lateral reading and different sorts of fact checking and checking multiple sources that are really important to be able to comprehensively understand an issue or debunk certain narratives. So we really like to stress that the importance of reliable internet and just broader access to these sorts of resources are important to making sure community members can access the information they want. But then the flip side of that, of course, is the language access piece, right? So even if certain members of the community have access to internet, computer devices, a huge swath of the Asian American community, around 31%, is limited English proficient. So it's really difficult for them to be able to process and understand and access certain English language content. So as we've kind of alluded to already, they turn to encrypted messaging apps, with WhatsApp group chats, WeChat group chats, and other alternative sources of information. And many attributes of these platforms really create fertile grounds for misinformation, for conspiracy theories to spread. So we see that these kinds of information voids and the information that then fills these voids really exacerbate misinformation. And we hope that the increase of credible information will be helpful to inoculate folks against these falsehoods. And so one thing that we're often stressing and advocating for is the importance of not only in-language resources, but also contextually informed resources and materials that address gaps of language, vocabulary, as well as historical and cultural knowledge. So, for example, not only having in-language ballots, so for example, ballots in Korean or in Chinese, but also having explainers and access into information that explains nuances in voting systems between, for example, Korea and the United States, to help people not only have information on like how to vote, where to vote, and things like that, but also to have that bigger, broader picture understanding that just having translated materials sometimes does not afford.
I actually do want to add to this. I think that one of my concerns that I see within a lot of the ethnic minority communities with the elderly, more specifically utilizing technology, is the safety parameters and the education to even use that technology. And the reason why I say this is because what we are seeing in regards to scams, many of the scams are deliberately targeting the senior population, first and foremost, and then number two, the immigrant population. And I have seen this in my district significantly. Almost every quarter, we do a senior scam stopper. We bring in law enforcement to kind of educate the seniors about what type of scams are happening. And the reason why it is so prevalent is because the moment that somebody gets an iPhone and they attach their wallet to their phone and have all their information and their banking, and a lot of the community use the same passwords and they don't understand how to keep that safe. And sometimes they have multiple people in their family that know their password because it's the same one. They are swindled out of, thousands upon thousands of dollars. Not only that, but sometimes through AI and through social media, the fact that we have social media and we want our seniors to be on social media because it helps them, step away from the isolation and loneliness that they may face because they are monolingual, because they are at home, because they have health concerns. And so social media is a great tool. But they are also being targeted because of the fact that, they may be facing isolation and loneliness and monolingual and much more. And so they sometimes are scammed by people who say, hey, I need money and I'm your son or your cousin or whatever from abroad, or I need some access to this, or you have depleted your account. Please verify your information. And they share all this. And they are basically, their entire account is hijacked. And there's very little that law enforcement can actually do. And so as much as technology is very useful, I also want to caution, especially those of us that have loved ones that are monolingual or elderly, of, hey, don't fall for scams, double check everything, ask me when it comes to money or, AI or, celebrities talking to me or something like that. And I will say that within my own family, I have seen this happen. Within my own community, I have seen this happen. Even with highly educated people that are not monolingual, that are very involved in American society, are being scammed. So they should not feel bad, but know that there's also evil people out there in the world that will take advantage.
Yeah, there's this idea that if you fall prey to misinformation or scams, that for some reason you are gullible or uneducated or underinformed, and that's a narrative that we're actively trying to counteract. It's not about gullibility. It's not about placing the blame on the individual or communities. It's about systems of responsibility in place. Annie, I would love to hear your take on this as well.
Uh, Thank you, Shreya, and thank you, Senator, for mentioning these scams are really targeting the less fluent English speakers, immigrant seniors, and vulnerable seniors. I think the FBI reported last year between 23 and 24, $16.6 billion were lost to cyber and financial crimes, but $4.8 billion target the seniors victims. So we're schizophrenia. On one hand, like Jenny said, we got to bridge the digital divide, right, for the seniors, knowing that 99% of the government programs now you have to apply through the internet, and sometimes in English only. So we need them to be prepared, right, to handle these scams. But on the other hand, these scams are targeting them for the very fact that using AI to pretend and impersonate government, banks, their family, asking for money, right? We heard all of these scams already. So I think that the trusted partnership, wherever our seniors or our vulnerable community exists, have to go to a place that they feel that they could, get the right information and ask the questions. I know that a lot of seniors always feel that they're bothering, or they're going to their family, they're troubling them, or they're adding burdens to them. But to prevent crimes and to prevent themselves from being victims, they have to be very, very, very careful. And almost like if you now the AI pretend to be their grandchildren, right? We have all heard that too. And the faces look so real. So in our internet classes now, we teach them, right, how to differentiate, by certain tactics. But we actually teach them that if it's a stranger that call you and ask you for money, ask you for your social security number or Medicare number, then hang up. Don't even say anything. But seniors tend to be very polite, right? They don't know how to kind of cut off a conversation. So we do a lot of the scams, like Senator said, out in the community to talk about what are the latest scams and how to prevent them. And that's ongoing almost every week in our senior centers. We remind them. We were so scared when the blessing scams that happened around Lunar New Year that scam our seniors out of their whole life savings. All their jewelry and all their cash were gone because they believe, that these so-called doctors or monks will bless their money and their jewelry, and then their family or themselves will have good health. And then they turn over hundreds and thousands sometimes of dollars to them. So it's very scary out there. So we have to do our part in making sure that we go around to where the seniors gather. Even in the Asian markets where they go, we try to tell them that that's where, at the bus stops, right, that's where these scammers will approach them, because they're elderly, they're females, they're immigrants, they might not speak English fluently. So those are the scams that we're trying to prevent. It's really important that we stop these scams, because seniors feel very, very sad for a long, long time afterwards, right? They sometimes don't even want to share it with their children because they're afraid that the children will be mad at them for losing their whole life savings. So this type of, we must close access, content, and also give them the affordability plans so that they could continue to, learn about how to navigate the new world now. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that example really highlights the scale of which, misinformation can really upend someone's life savings, generations of well-being here in the United States. So thank you so much for sharing that and for the work that you're doing. I think through this conversation, we've really highlighted the parties of responsibility here, and Annie, you definitely have described the responsibility of communities and individuals of arming and educating themselves against scams. And you brought up AI, and some of this artificially generated content is incredibly hard, and it's becoming even harder to detect as an individual, as a human individual, or even as a community. So we go back to Jenny's point at the top about the responsibility of tech companies and Senator Wahab's perspective on what legislation could do to protect communities, so that in your example, nobody's losing their entire life savings over a scam. I want to move us into talking about AI quickly before we talk about measuring our progress and looking ahead. How has misinformation evolved in the recent years when it comes to AA and HPI communities, and what makes this exact moment distinct in combating misinformation? I know Annie had brought in this conversation about AI, not only generated images, but also really harmful and hard to detect content, such as audio content of loved ones or video content that is hard for individuals or for humans to detect. But Senator Wahab, I would love to pass it over to you to talk about AI, the current moment, and how it's distinct.
Definitely. So, first and foremost, I'd like to just highlight that last year we introduced about 3 bills that were all signed by the governor. The Stop Online Predators Act, which basically, is about revenge porn, prohibiting unauthorized distribution of artificially created sexually explicit images that cause emotional distress to an individual, largely targeting, obviously, women and children. And the other one is the AI child safety. It basically prohibits the possession and distribution of explicit abusive images of children by clarifying that images, even created through AI, it may be fake, but it's still prohibited. And then the final one was the digital identity theft. And that is requiring social media platforms to provide a more active mechanism for someone to report sexually explicit images on their social media platform. Now, I will say that I think that we have been trying to push and the accountability from the social media platforms in particular, because that is where we are seeing a lot of the crimes. However, there tends to be a constitutionality of freedom of speech and much more that has been kind of difficult to thread the needle of freedom of speech versus, accountability. Now, with that said, AI is very advanced, and it's every single day it's getting better and better. In fact, banks are falling prey to it too when people are signing up for loans. Artificially generated images of individuals doing a loan interview and getting hundreds of thousands of dollars granted to them, thinking, the bank's thinking that it's actually a real human being. We want to keep pushing the effort for accountability, and there have been some efforts in the legislature that says that all artificially generated images need to have a statement that says it's artificially generated. We know that we have been trying to block, the voice recognition and some of those efforts, but the technology is moving far quicker than policy. It takes us 9 months to a year, maybe even 2 years to develop one single policy. Technology advances in a 6-month period of time very quickly. So we are seeing that, but then a lot of the bad actors are also abroad. So, for example, a lot of people who commit these types of crimes will have a server in a foreign nation, usually an unfriendly nation, and being able to stop that, even if images are generated, even if the person who originally created this is apprehended, the servers are not in our territory, right? So we've been seeing more and more problems through this. I think law enforcement is deeply concerned about this. I just attended a law enforcement convention talking about technology specifically and how can we target that. So I think that there's a lot there. In regards to AI, the legislature has introduced last year, for example, over 60 bills in the space, right? more and more, we're trying to talk about, biometric information when we use the Face ID, when we use our keypads with our fingers, information that is about racial or ethnic origin or religious or practices, or, the genetic data that we have heard a lot about, insurance information, health information, account login, so many different things that you can touch regarding privacy, right? Let alone artificial intelligence and much more. So I think there's a lot of room for legislation in this space. And it's deeply concerning what is happening as we are still also trying to prevent it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I completely understand and am a little afraid of the scale of change that is happening and the need to move at the speed of trust. But it creates a truly unique environment and a moment of rapid shift. So thank you for your work. Anyone else on this question before we move on to measuring progress?
I just want to add a short kind of a note that with AI, they generate so much information so fast that our elderly keep bringing that, I read this on the WeChat, as Senator mentioned, right? WhatsApp, WeChat, some of the more Asian themed apps. And is it true? If I follow eat these foods and eat these herbal medicine, then my blood pressure will be low and blah blah blah. So we said that no, don't trust everything that you read on your WeChat site, because you have to go to your doctors, right, and verify. But some of them just go and buy up supplements and whatnot without even checking. So my fear is AI is going to dominate a lot of these information, and on the community-based level, we could never keep up. Even for us, we have to find out, like within the WeChat site, which site is more trustworthy and which sites are just fly by night and want you to buy their products. It's grown so fast that even as a CBO trying to deal with it ourselves internally, right? And now we have to make sure that when our clients bring this information to us, where do we check for? Where do we verify how real and how true these are? So I'm kind of very, and I thank the senator for continuously working on legislation, to help us by labeling that is generated from AI will help. But we also need to get this information out into the public as well. Yeah.
I'll just add on super quickly and say that I think something that Annie mentioned around AI that is particularly concerning to us is just the scale, right? And the ease at which this kind of technology can be deployed and often weaponized against our communities. So just to give an example, a lot of the misinformation we see targeting Asian American communities, particularly around elections, is directly translated from English. And so in the past, I think to a certain extent, a lot of that was done manually. Like people would go and actually translate or add captions to add Chinese or Vietnamese language captions to videos, or translate direct tweets and things like that. But now I'm certain that a lot of that is just done with the help of like AI enabled translation tools. So it's just so much more in terms of the amount of and the scale of the content we're seeing. So it's kind of an issue of like, obviously that technology has always been there, right? But just with the onset of AI, it's just so much more. And it's hard. It's like you're constantly playing a game of whack-a-mole, and this is exacerbating it to a level that we haven't seen before.
I keep on thinking back to the term that you used, Jenny, at the top of our conversation about, what is filling an information vacuum. And Annie, thank you so much for bringing that example about, misinformation, and how the misinformation that exists in the ecosystem right now is training potentially more and amplified misinformation that gets funneled into the trash in, trash out sort of model of unchecked generative AI. If there's a vacuum of responsibility, I'd love to move us also to this last section on measuring progress and looking ahead. all of you have mentioned an element of trust, and whether that's trusted messengers or a trusted platform for communities. What does recovery look like when trust is broken?
I think it's accountability. I think that people have to be accountable. If, for example, any of us can reshare a story or post something thinking it's real ourselves, right? And immediately saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry. This was inaccurate. My previous post was false information. I didn't realize this, or whatever the case may be. I think that's the first piece, but then also knowing which actors keep posting misinformation, right? So in my district, there's a handful of people that post fear-mongering information, post racist information regarding H-1B visas or COVID or, an elected official here or there. And that type of behavior should be called out. And I think people can politely do it and say, hey, this is not accurate. Here's a link to, whatever's truth. And just kind of keep making sure that, we do our part when we see the misinformation, and not let it just slide just because, it's none of our business, or it's not worth our time, because there are lives on the line sometimes with some of this information.
Yeah, I keep on hearing this recurring sort of metaphor of inoculation and using a vaccine framework to talk about misinformation specifically, or images of wildfires, which feels very relevant, especially to the communities in California and across the United States, of what the harm, misinformation can do. And lastly, I keep on hearing that uh, repeating misinformation, even if you are trying to correct a thought or correct facts, is it's increasing that wildfire. So it's an especially difficult um, issue to tackle. And thank you to all three of you for your work. I'll leave us off, and Jenny, I want to give you time as well, with a final question. What are some solutions or community efforts that give you hope that NHPI communities can become more resilient to misinformation? And how do we know if we're actually moving the needle?
Yeah, great question. So I will end by uplifting some work that our organization is doing, and as well as a lot of our amazing partner organizations. So at Advancing Justice AAJC, we are in the process of a broader understanding of the Asian American media consumption landscape. So earlier this year, we published a report entitled Beyond Language Translation: Asian Americans, News and Information Seeking, and the Circulation of Problematic Narratives Online. So quite the mouthful, but the report is grounded on the findings of 12 focus groups that we conducted nationwide to directly hear from members of the community on how they're consuming news, what sorts of stories matter to them, what are the best ways to build resilience to misinformation, and really try to nettle at the root causes and underlying factors that make people susceptible to certain stories and narratives, and what makes stories sticky. And we're actually conducting a parallel survey to be published, with results to be published at the beginning of next year. So I'm really excited about these kinds of more community-based efforts that let us hear directly from impacted individuals and really start to think about it, obviously as a technology issue, but an issue that centers people at its foremost. And I would also love to uplift the great work of organizations doing more in language fact checks and other community-facing initiatives. So we have great partners at organizations like Via Fact Track, PLBA, which is a offshoot of Chinese for Affirmative Action that does really great in language fact checks and in-depth context and explainers across a wide variety of issues. We also work with an organization called No Melon Group that puts out in language in Chinese podcasts about various issues and does more of like an in-depth analysis of certain breaking news events that moves beyond just the headlines and really helps to get members of the community facts, in addition to broadly just doing fact checks and things like that. So yeah, really, really a lot of great work out there. And I think it's exciting to think that we have a lot of really amazing partners in this space in the face of this really seemingly daunting and frankly scary issue that intersects so many different aspects of policy in our everyday lives.
And for CBOs like ours that really provide a lot of direct service, one-on-one, face-to-face to our clients, we feel that continuous education and continuously seeking grants, for devices, as much as people use smartphones, there's still people that use Chromebooks, maybe small iPads that would help them to attend classes, learn. Although now a lot of people would bring their smartphones to our classes, and our teachers would then just show them, what they want individually, tailored to their needs. But I think that that part of the work cannot stop, because once we stop, we never catch up, right, with the AI development and the latest scams and so on and so forth. Another good way is to, convince smaller groups. We found that really helps, because when you create a smaller community where they share information with each other and they could say, oh, I heard about this, is that true? Then you are among a group of trusted people. So when we have a cancer support group, we created just a support group and a website for them so that they could share, and also with, just like Jenny said, you could go to particular site and verify the information. So as smaller circles like that, we find that it's easier to communicate instead of sending out a lot of flyers and press release and holding press conferences, which takes up also a lot of time. And we also would urge all our peace officers, organization, the PD, the DA, the sheriffs, all of the people that have a role in preventing scams to work with community-based organization. In order to serve really the AANHPI community, we have to work with each individual community in order to get the messages out. So we urge all the partners in the government side to work with the private nonprofit side in order to reach, the high percentage of seniors and also high percentage of AAPI NH population. So those are some community-based solutions that we could all kind of work on. And I think that for us, we were very, very lucky. For 14 years, we've had support from tech companies, definitely like Comcast, that provides continuous funding to fund these internet essential classes for us. We organize about 40, 50 classes a year so that this training continues and not stop. So those are some of the ways that we keep our community safe and resilient. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Annie, Jenny, Senator Wahab, for your time today. I am leaving this conversation a little more hopeful than I entered, because even though misinformation thrives on, division, on lack, on, not having enough time, what we've heard today is, despite this scale of impact, despite the moment of uncertainty and rapid movement, there are stories of connection, of community collaboration, and of care. And that is, to me, what resilience looks like in practice. So thank you so much, each of you, for your work, and to the team at APAICS for allowing this conversation to have space.
Thank you all for a fantastic 2 days of learning, insights, and innovation. During the 2025 APAICS Technology Summit, we had many productive conversations on top tech issues, such as AI, spectrum policy, digital equity, and so much more. Thank you for joining us in these important discussions. Once again, I want to thank our incredible summit partners, Amazon, Apple, AT&T, Charter, Citi, Coinbase, Comcast, CTIA, Dell, DoorDash, Fathom, Gates Foundation, Google, Lyft, MasterCard, Microsoft, Netflix, Nielsen, TikTok, and Visa for their generous support, as well as all of our speakers, panelists, and moderators for their time and dedication to our communities. Make sure to visit our website at apaics.org to learn more about the work that APAICS is doing, including upcoming events and programs. Thank you all for being a part of this year's Technology Summit, and we look forward to seeing you soon.